K-9 unit lunges at an unremarkable suitcase on the tarmac. Seconds later, 3 guns wrapped in thermal foil are discovered inside. What begins as a routine inspection at an American airport unravels into a deep web of betrayal, hidden identities, and ghosts from old wars. A loyal dog, a forgotten brotherhood, and a ticking clock no one saw coming. This isn't just a crime, it's a reckoning. Like what you're about to witness? Hit like, subscribe, and stay with us as the truth comes to light. It was 7:42 a.m. when the first bark echoed across Terminal B at Atlanta International. Detective Marissa Lane instinctively stiffened, her fingers tightening around the K-9 leash as Troy, her German Shepherd partner, emitted a low, guttural growl that wasn't routine. Troy had been unusually quiet all morning, attentive but composed, as if something unknown was simmering beneath his trained discipline. They'd been assigned to luggage carousel surveillance as part of an internal checkpoint audit. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing ever was, until now. The baggage cart in question rolled into view from the underground conveyor. A young, bleary-eyed ground crewman in reflective gear was wheeling it toward Carousel 6, when Troy lunged with a sudden, ferocious urgency. Marie barely held on. "Troy," she called, but the dog was locked in. A tension in his body she recognized from only a few moments in the past, and they had all ended in either a seizure or a life saved. Troy wasn't just alerting, he was hunting. The ground crew backed away, startled, as Troy circled the last container on the cart, a hard-headed, black Samsonite suitcase, nothing visibly suspicious. But Troy began pawing at it viciously, his muzzle pressing hard into the seam as he barked again, louder, more frantic. "Hold traffic at the terminal door," Marissa snapped into her radio. "Code yellow, possible hit, I need immediate backup at baggage 6. The young man who'd pushed the cart began to protest. "I just picked it up from the underbelly, it's tagged from Dallas," he said, holding up the cargo manifest, but Marissa barely glanced at it. Her focus was entirely on Troy, who had now scratched deep enough into the suitcase's zipper lining to expose a strange glint. Something not plastic, not clothing. When backup arrived and the suitcase was carefully opened under protocol, the terminal fell into silence. Inside were 3 firearms, black market Berettas, each tightly wrapped in insulation or emergency blankets, designed to beat the scanners. Someone had tried to sneak them through, well, but not past Troy. "You see this?" Officer Jensen whispered beside her. "That's heat-resistant foil. That's pro-level concealment." The manifest was correct. Flight from Dallas domestic. But what raised more eyebrows came 10 minutes later, when they tracked the baggage tag to the passenger, a 54-year-old man named Richard Paulson. TSA pre-check clearance, former employee at Hartsfield Airport, retired ground technician. He had boarded the flight in Texas, landed, picked up no bags, and left the airport within 10 minutes. No checked luggage claim. He had deliberately walked away from the suitcase. Marissa watched the security footage again and again. Paulson's movements were relaxed, casual, too casual. "Why would someone like him risk this?" she murmured. "He knows the system." But something else was wrong. The timestamp on the carousel's CCTV feed didn't align with the loading report. The suitcase had appeared on the cart before it was officially logged in the system. Someone had planted it. The check-in tag had been printed from a secondary kiosk, accessible only to staff. Back at K-9 headquarters, Troy lay quietly at her feet, breathing slow, eyes half closed. Marissa reached down and rubbed behind his ears. "You smelled that through all the layers," she whispered. "You knew." But what was he really alerting to? Guns, yes, but also something else. He had never reacted this violently to weapons alone. Later that evening, an airport supervisor walked into her office, closing the door gently. "He did a sweep of the outbound luggage area," he said, voice low. "Found faint traces of petin residue, military-grade explosive, on the conveyor belt where that suitcase was sitting." Marissa looked up sharply. "So that bag was contaminated or used to carry something else before the guns?" The supervisor nodded. "This wasn't just weapons smuggling, someone's testing the system." Marissa felt the pit open in her stomach. Her fingers absently traced Troy's leash, her mind already racing ahead. A man with insider access, a bag that was never meant to be claimed, guns wrapped in thermal foil, explosive traces, and a dog that hadn't just alerted, he had panicked. She looked down at Troy. You smelled something we haven't even uncovered yet. Across the airport, Richard Paulson had been detained quietly by plainclothes officers outside a coffee shop in Terminal D. He didn't resist. When asked why he abandoned his suitcase, he merely shrugged. Didn't have anything in it, he said calmly. Must have been a mistake. No ID on the suitcase, no fingerprints inside. The foil erased any biological trace. But the surveillance glitch, 13 minutes of blank footage from the check-in security camera, wasn't a glitch. It had been looped manually. The IT logs showed someone with admin access had overridden the timestamp. Whoever planted the bag had done so with precision, and with someone else's badge. That night, Marissa reviewed the full chain of events on a whiteboard in her office. Troy lay curled on the floor behind her. We've got 1 suitcase, 3 guns, 1 ex-employee, and 0 motive, she murmured aloud. But you didn't bark at a guy. You barked at the story behind that suitcase. And I think that story's just... Richard Paulson sat in the gray-walled interview room with the calm of a man who had nothing to lose. Hands folded, eyes steady, posture measured, as if the cuffs on his wrists were just a minor inconvenience, rather than the steel line between him and federal prison. Marissa Lane stood across from him, notepad in hand, but her eyes were on his body language. The way he didn't blink when she read off the manifest details, the way he didn't even ask what was found inside the suitcase. Most passengers, guilty or not, asked, but not him. He just stared back and said, "That bag's not mine." Marissa raised an eyebrow. "It was checked in under your name, your pre-check, your tag, and you left the airport without retrieving it." Paulson exhaled slowly. "You ever been a ramp tech detective? Little things. Guy comes up, says his bag got mishandled. Already tagged and ready. He's off shift, asks if I can just check it through since I still have access. Says it's already loaded with his info. It happens all the time." Marissa narrowed her eyes. "And you didn't think twice?" Paulson tilted his head, almost amused. He worked in the back of the machine. That bag had my name, my info, looked legit. Maybe I should have said no, but hell, maybe it was just a favor for a guy with a messed up shift. "What guy?" she asked. "Name?" Paulson hesitated for the first time. "Didn't give one," he said. "Just said he was short on time and I was on his list of guys who help out." "Description?" she pushed. "Tall," he said. "Black hoodie, mask still on from the cargo bay. Could have been anyone. That was too convenient. Too practiced." Either Paulson was being played or he was playing the long game. Back at Security Ops, the technical team was reviewing the logs for camera feed interruptions. Terminal B had 24 surveillance units across its baggage and check-in lanes, all feeding into the central storage array. Only one showed a break in continuity. Camera B17 positioned above the staff kiosk adjacent to the loading dock entry. Marissa leaned over the monitor as the technician pointed at the screen. "Look here," he said, fast-forwarding through the footage. At 5:58 a.m., everything's normal. Passenger volume, staff movement. At exactly 6:01 and 17 seconds, the feed cuts. It comes back online at 6:14 and 20 seconds. Marissa's pulse ticked up. "Looped?" "Yeah," he said. "So if anyone was watching in real time, they'd still see people walking, bags rolling, lights blinking. But that was old footage on a loop. Meanwhile, the real scene was offline." "Who has level 3 access?" she asked. He clicked through a list. Maintenance engineers, floor supervisors, lead TSA. "Small group, pull names," she said. "I want every person who clocked in with that access that morning." He looked at her. "We already did. 2 people used it. One was the floor tech assigned to that area, Kevin Halstead. The other, Richard Paulson." Marissa stared at the screen, jaw tightening. "You sure?" "Confirmed." His badge pinged at the kiosk at 6 o'clock and 58 seconds, just before the feed cut. "But he claimed someone else used his credentials." "Possible," the tech said, "or he's covering tracks." But something didn't add up. Paulson had been retired for 3 years. His badge should have been deactivated. Someone had reactivated it, and that could only be done from higher up in the system. Someone with oversight, not just access. Back in the interview room, Marissa placed a printed still from the security kiosk footage on the table. It was grainy but showed a man in a hoodie reaching toward the kiosk. She slid it across the table. "Is this you?" Paulson didn't look down. "Looks like someone in a hoodie," he said flatly. "Could be anyone." You used your badge, she said. If that's not you, someone set you up. That's what I'm saying, Paulson replied evenly. You're just a little behind. But you still checked the bag, she pressed, because someone asked. Paulson leaned forward now, eyes sharp. You think I knew what was in it? Marissa stayed quiet. You think I'm stupid enough to move guns through my own ID, he continued. Hell, I might be a little lazy, a little broke, but I'm not suicidal. Whoever used me knew the system, knew the scanners, knew which dog was working that day. It's not me you should be after. Later, as she walked Troy across the concrete apron outside Terminal B, Marissa replayed the words. Knew which dog was working. That stock airport manifest didn't publicly show which K9s were on duty. Only someone internal could have known Troy's rotations. Someone who understood that Troy wasn't just trained for narcotics or firearms, but also had legacy training from his military deployments. There was something about this case that kept circling back to military tactics. Layered concealment, decoy behavior, timing the camera blind spot. Not drug smugglers, not amateur gun runners. This had the feel of something deliberate, something rehearsed. She passed the operations hallway and caught sight of Halstead, the floor tech whose badge had also pinged that morning. Middle-aged, slouched, distracted, carrying a clipboard. She made a mental note. No direct evidence yet, but something about the way he avoided eye contact triggered her internal radar. Troy, too, gave a small huff as they passed. Subtle, but she trusted it. In her office that evening, she spread the printouts across her desk. A chain was beginning to form. Paulson's access, the 13-minute camera loop, the bag, the foil wrap, the explosive residue. Each piece alone might have seemed inconclusive, but together they whispered intent. And the whisper was getting louder. Outside, the lights of arriving flights blinked in rhythm across the dark runway. Marissa tapped a finger on the corner of the photo showing the looped footage timestamp. Someone wrote this script, she said to herself, and we just walked into Act 2. By the time the email arrived, marked confidential and forwarded from an anonymous internal address, Marissa had already begun to suspect what the footage would reveal. The thumbnail showed a blurry still from a narrow angle, some kind of overhead corner cam, the kind not connected to the main security system but wired locally for backup logging. The subject of the frame was unmistakable. A man in standard TSA uniform, pale blue shirt, black tactical cargo pants, black utility belt. The timestamp matched the 13-minute blackout window to the second. The moment she clicked play, the entire narrative cracked. The video was silent, grainy, but undeniable. At 6:05 a.m., the man entered from a side hallway, whirled a black Samsonite suitcase from a holding area marked priority luggage only, passed the metal detector and ID scan and approached the baggage carousel's rear gate. With a deliberate motion, he lifted the suitcase onto the belt and gave it a subtle push. The carousel activated, lights blinking as it swallowed the bag into the rotating system. No secondary scan, no baggage log entry, no accompanying traveler. Marissa paused the video and zoomed in. The man never looked up. His face remained partially obscured by a black baseball cap pulled low and the shadow cast from the security rack above. But the way he moved, the familiaritis, the ease, wasn't that of an outsider. This was someone who belonged here, who had walked this corridor hundreds of times. She immediately pulled the personnel roster. 3 TSA staff had been on shift during that window in that section. 2 were already accounted for. The third, Eli Garner, had logged a bathroom break at 5:59 a.m. and never returned to his assigned post. His badge hadn't pinged since. His apartment voicemail full. When an officer was dispatched to his residence, the door was unlocked and the place looked as if someone had left in a hurry. Toothbrush still wet, a plate of half-eaten eggs on the kitchen counter, and the TV left humming on a news channel with no sound. Meanwhile, in the K9 Division's evidence lab, the forensic team had finished analyzing the remnants from the suitcase. Marissa met them in the sterile white room lined with labeled bins and steel benches. Troy sat outside the lab doors, alert but calm, ears occasionally twitching with every sound from the hallway. "We finished the swab," said Dr. Lena Schwartz, head chemist. "The foil was the first clue. We've seen this before, not just for smuggling but for masking secondary residues. Take a look." She handed Marissa a report showing chemical breakdowns. Trace elements of RDX and acetone peroxide. Marissa's brows pulled together. You're saying the suitcase carried bomb-making residue? More than residue. Short. At some point, this suitcase was exposed to an environment where those compounds were either handled or partially processed. It's possible it was used to transport precursor materials. And the guns? Likely a decoy, Schwartz said. Their concealment got our attention, but that level of residue? That's what Troy really reacted to. Marissa turned toward the window, where Troy's silhouette stood calmly against the corridor glass. She remembered his initial reaction. Not just alert but borderline aggressive. A sound she'd only heard 3 times in the past. Once during a federal explosives bust at a freight rail yard, once in a desert exercise with EOD units in New Mexico, and once when they'd found a child's backpack outside an embassy wall in her pre-NYPD deployment. Each time, it wasn't about the quantity of explosive. It was the intention soaked into the object. Somehow, Troy sensed it every time. And now, this suitcase, on an ordinary Monday morning at an American airport, had triggered the same response. Back in her office, Marissa layered the new footage with existing manifests, shift schedules, and Troy's incident log. Eli Garner had access. Paulson claimed to have been used. The suitcase had dual purpose, to test breach points and measure response. Whoever was behind this hadn't just intended to get something through, they wanted to learn the system's rhythms from within. Not to destroy, but to study, to map it. As she rewound the video again, a small detail caught her eye. The patch on the left shoulder of the uniformed man. At first glance, it looked standard. TSA patch, security insignia. But on closer zoom, the threadwork was off. The stitching was uneven. A counterfeit? Or a modified badge? She forwarded the clip to a DHS contact with the subject line, "Need identity verification." 20 minutes later, she received a text. Uniform non-standard. Patch from older TSA design, phased out 2015. This person is not in current system. Likely impersonation. So it wasn't Eli Garner. Or, if it was, he was playing a deeper game. Either way, someone in the video wore a uniform to blend, not to serve. Which meant the system hadn't just been exploited, it had been deliberately mirrored, manipulated. Later that night, Marissa found herself walking the long perimeter fence of the cargo bay. Troy pacing beside her, sniffing occasionally but calm. The night air was cool, the tarmac empty. Her mind spun through the pattern. Stolen access, altered credentials, deliberate masking agents. A dog trained for one thing but awakened by another. She stopped at the far edge of the chain link boundary, where the security lights blinked in staggered succession. Beyond it, a service road curled into darkness. Troy stiffened. She followed his gaze. A small maintenance truck unmarked, idling in the shadow of a loading ramp. No driver in sight. She reached for her radio. Marissa didn't call for backup immediately. She circled wide with Troy pressed close to her side, scanning the perimeter while the idling truck remained shadowed under the steel lip of the loading dock. The vehicle bore no logo, no plate on the front, just the soft chug of an engine that had been left running. When she reached the side window, she angled her flashlight in and found the cabin empty, driver's door locked, passenger side cracked slightly open, no radio, no registration card. Troy let out a low growl, ears angled forward, and Marissa felt the hair rise on her neck. She keyed her mic. "Lane to ops, I have an unoccupied utility truck idling behind loading ramp 14. No visible ID, no driver. Request sweep and tow team." Then she pulled back, letting Troy give the cab a full perimeter sniff. The dog's behavior wasn't frantic, but focused. He paused near the rear tire, nose lingering, tail low. She noted the subtle shift in posture. "What is it, boy?" Troy didn't bark this time, but looked at her with the same locked-in stare he'd used before. There was something about this vehicle, its scent perhaps, that connected to the suitcase. The next morning, the name Eli Garner made headlines. Officially listed as a TSA floor supervisor with 9 years of experience, no prior incident reports, and a clean clearance record. Garner had left the building during his break and never returned. Surveillance caught him entering the staff hallway at 5:59 a.m., but no footage showed him exiting. His phone pinged once from the staff wing stairwell, then went dark. His car, a gray Ford Fusion, was found in Lot C near the staff shuttle terminal. Engine cold, no signs of struggle, keys still in the ignition. Marissa stood beside the vehicle with the first light of day slanting across the windshield and asked the question no one had yet spoken aloud. Did Garner vanish, or was someone using his name? While forensics combed the truck from the night before, Marissa turned her attention back to the flight manifest. Richard Paulson's name still sat on the passenger log, but something about his story kept gnawing at her. She contacted DHS VetCorps for access to sealed clearance records and requested a full background trace. The results hit her inbox just after noon, and the moment she opened the file, she knew why the details hadn't aligned. The social security number linked to Richard Paulson traced back to a former Marine Corps communications specialist, dishonorably discharged under a sealed Article 32 investigation. The name was real, but the man wasn't, at least not the man who'd boarded that plane. The photo attached to the original Paulson was 30 pounds heavier, wore glasses, and had a visible facial scar across his temple. The man arrested in Atlanta had no scar, perfect vision, and zero biometric match with the government's previous records. He was using a dead identity, or more precisely, one abandoned and quietly removed from active roles after the discharge, which meant someone had access to military archives. Someone with knowledge of which identities could slip through civilian systems unnoticed. Marissa felt a jolt in her gut. This wasn't just insider knowledge. It was operational planning, the kind learned through years of fieldwork, not a few YouTube videos. She picked up the phone and called Colonel Samuel Raines, a retired Air Force intelligence officer who now consulted on veteran case tracking for the Department of Defense. When she gave the name, there was a pause. Then Raines said, "We buried the original Paulson's profile 6 years ago. He went AWOL after a failed comm sweep in Kandahar. His discharge was papered over. Someone's resurrecting ghosts." That same afternoon, one of the technicians working on the idling utility truck called her over. He handed her a bagged evidence item, a standard black field cap with a sweat-stained rim and fraying Velcro. Inside the seam, nearly invisible unless pried open, was a small strip of paper, no bigger than a fortune cookie note. Printed on it, in tiny block letters, was a phrase, "Watch the Watchers," followed by a serial number, 17343. Marissa took the slip and turned it over. No watermark, no fiber track. She scanned the code into her secure tablet. The prefix 17 marked a classification code used in old Pentagon comms databases, specifically for internal field agents, Red Team operatives tasked with testing domestic vulnerabilities. But the program associated with that code had been decommissioned years ago. K-class profiles had been erased, or so they thought. What if someone had reactivated them? Back at HQ, she gathered every piece they had: the unscanned suitcase, the residue, the unlogged truck, the disappearing TSA agent, the forged Paulson ID, and now a breadcrumb linking this entire sequence to a long-dead Black Ops unit. The dog's alerts weren't random. They were tethered to a smell he couldn't forget, the same chemical blend used during her own counter-IID deployments in Ramadi and Helmeth Province. The same smell that clung to crates never acknowledged, operations never spoken about. That night, she reviewed Troy's old training files. Before he'd been transferred to civilian law enforcement, he had been a handler's partner in the 173rd K9 Tactical Division, trained to detect not only explosives, but specific chemical signatures tied to ordnance manufacturing in unstable regions. His file listed 5 unique markers: TNT-based compounds, urea nitrate, PFN derivatives, military-grade HMX, and 1 custom compound coded as FX13, a substance used in field simulations of high-velocity bomb casing tests. That final compound had only been used in one program, Project Watchline, run by JSOC in early 2013, later shut down for internal misconduct. One of the listed operatives who worked with Watchline's logistics team had gone missing shortly before the program's termination. His name had since been redacted, but his field alias matched a pattern now visible in the handwriting on the note found in the cap. Block caps, serial digits. And the phrase, "Watch the Watchers," had been an internal motto for Red Team raids meant to test civilian vulnerability under simulated insurgent attack. Marissa stared at the phrase, her mind connecting threads even the DHS hadn't dared lay bare. Someone wasn't testing the airport. They were testing the response of the entire Homeland security chain. Systems, personnel, protocols, all of it. And they were doing it while wearing the skin of familiar names, long erased from public memory, long buried under quiet failures and classified shame. Then her phone rang. The voice on the other end was hoarse, distant. "You're digging in the wrong place," it said. "He's not rogue, he's repurposed." Marissa froze. "Who is this?" The line went dead. The phone call left a phantom pressure in Marissa's ear long after the line had gone silent. The voice low, male, fatigued, cutting through layers of official narrative like a scalpel. "He's not rogue, he's repurposed." She ran the audio through the system, but there was no caller ID, no bounce path to trace. The number had existed for 37 seconds before vanishing from the carrier's logs. Whoever had spoken knew how to operate outside the grid, which meant they were either embedded or trained to disappear. And it also meant she wasn't the only one paying attention to what Troy had uncovered. Back at the lab, the firearms team had completed their first forensic work on the weapons found inside the suitcase. Marissa entered the evidence room with gloves on, ready to hear confirmation that they were standard black market imports, stripped of all traceable parts. But instead, Agent Colby, ballistics lead for the DHS, met her with a tight-lipped look. "You need to see this," he said, guiding her to a magnified imaging station. One of the 3 Berettas sat beneath the lens, its polymer frame stripped back to show the serial plate, which had clearly been scratched with acid and re-retched by hand. Colby pointed to the barely legible line of numbers. "This partial sequence was recovered through vapor-ass restoration. Looks like a clumsy attempt to conceal rather than erase." Marissa leaned in. "Can we match it?" "We already did," he replied. "He's not on the open market. This exact serial string matches a firearm reported stolen from a munitions depot at Creech Air Force Base, Nevada. 5 years ago." Marissa blinked. "That's not possible, those cases were sealed." "Not sealed enough," Colby said. "The depot break-in was internal. 1 guard dead, 2 incapacitated with military-grade neurogas. The weapons cache taken was small, precise 23 units, all specialized issue. That Beretta is one of them, so you're saying someone held on to military weapons for 5 years and just now started pushing them through airport?" Colby countered. "Someone wanted us to find it. Planting it was intentional. They wanted this signature recognized." Marissa stared at the weapon under the lens, her mind returning to the coded note found inside the hat. "Who watches the watchers? Serial 17343K. That wasn't just paranoia. It was a message, a breadcrumb, and the moment they'd recovered this weapon, someone out there knew they'd be forced to follow it." Back in the command office, she pulled up the internal work logs for cargo access security over the last 2 years. If someone knew how to bypass the scanners, loop surveillance, and plant a high-yield case in open flow, they had to understand the vulnerabilities of the entire ground control system. And that meant experience, insider knowledge, not from TSA policy manuals but from dirty shifts on cold tarmacs. Years of watching the human loopholes open and close. Marissa cross-referenced staff terminations, unexplained badge pings and exit passes from both Atlanta and surrounding logistics hubs. The system churned for 5 minutes before yielding a flag. Marcus Shaw, a security contractor terminated 8 months ago from a bonded cargo subcontractor at Hartsfield-Jackson. Reason: insubordination and unauthorized access to restricted zones. Former Marine Corps Special Handling certified. His last shift was logged near Terminal G, secondary inspection gate, the same zone where the internal routing lines intersect with the priority luggage loop. Marissa stared at his file. The headshot showed a lean man with close-cropped hair, neutral expression, and empty eyes. He was forgettable by design, but what stood out was the work history. 5 years of security rotation in cargo handling zones, all tied to fast-cycle freight clearance. Shaw had signed off on over 600 high-value inspection waivers during his tenure. At least a dozen had been questioned but never escalated. The man knew how to move things under radar and how to leave no signature. His home address was old, the forwarding number disconnected, his VA file flagged for pending behavioral review, then left open. But more importantly, his discharge papers were sealed under a section code rarely used, one reserved for classified missions that had gone operationally dark. Marissa felt her gut clench. She turned to Troy, who had been resting at her feet but now sat up straight, ears twitching. She opened the incident board on the office wall, rearranging the sequence. Paulson's false identity, the suitcase with the military compound trace. She called DHS Central again. I want all data on Marcus Shaw, military background, prior employers, handler logs, psychological evals, anything you have that didn't make it into public record. The officer on the line paused. Agent Lane Shaw's file is partially classified. His last deployment was under JSOC attachment. You'll need a level 7 override. Then escalate it, she said coldly, because one of his prints just showed up on the inside wheel well of that utility truck we found last night. The line went quiet. Then came the voice. Understood. 10 hours later, Marissa received a secure package with an encrypted file. Inside was an excerpt from a 2018 redacted operations report detailing a training exercise turned extraction mission near Herat. Shaw had been embedded in a logistics team that went dark for 3 days after their convoy was ambushed. The recovery notes hinted at dissent among ranks, unauthorized civilian contact, and an incident involving the disposal of weapons to avoid trace. The commanding officer's summary read, Subject Shaw displayed exceptional situational awareness, but demonstrated increasingly detached behavior and ethical ambiguity during field decisions. Recommended for discharge, watch list if re-employed any civilian infrastructure roles. Marissa exhaled slowly, her fingers drumming the desk. Shaw hadn't just walked away from that world, he had taken it with him, and now he was using it to probe the American homeland from the inside. Not for chaos, but for calibration. These weren't acts of terrorism. They were measurements. Force projection simulations, response time mapping, and someone, either within the system or above it, had decided to let him run. Troy shifted beside her, ears pricking again, this time toward the window. Across the tarmac, a new cargo container was being offloaded from a nondescript transport truck, its tag code 1 digit off from a flagged shipment line. She stood up quickly, heart pounding, her voice sharp into the radio. Unit 6, hold movement on cargo bin 44B. We need eyes and full sniff scan now. Then she was moving, Troy already at her side, pulling ahead into the light as the container door creaked open. Slow, stiff, unnatural. Marissa stood just beyond the loading dock, watching as Troy sniffed the outer seam of cargo bin 44B. The container itself looked standard, but the manifest said otherwise. Declared as empty, inbound from a local warehouse barely 20 minutes away, not scheduled for delivery or use until the following morning. Yet there it was, rolling off the transport at twilight, with no assigned handler, no driver ID, and a paper trail so thin it might as well have not existed. Troy gave a sharp bark, then another, more urgent, his body tense the way it had with the suitcase. Marissa called in bomb techs and stepped back, mind racing as she tied this anomaly to the deeper web she was now unraveling. One where faces wore uniforms but pledges lay elsewhere. By the time the bin was cleared and found empty, sterile even, Marissa was in the records office, sifting through the personnel back-end, retracing every name connected to unusual badge activity in the last 60 days. Her search cross-referenced employee bonuses, access irregularities, and off-cycle deposits into payroll accounts. One filter changed everything. Third-party employee support programs linked to external vendors. Out of the dozens that appeared, one name repeated itself under different labels. The Lexington Pioneer Fund, officially registered as a nonprofit providing emergency assistance to transportation staff affected by economic hardship or trauma disabilities. On paper, it was benevolent, unassuming, but its payment record didn't match its mission. 3 employees, all flagged in previous security incidents, had received undisclosed deposits over the past 8 months from the Lexington Fund. Ronald D., ramp crew technician, Harlan Vickers, low-level customs assistant, and Denny Tran, an equipment maintenance coordinator. None of them reported military service. None were in upper management, yet each had once held short-term assignments in sensitive cargo control lanes. All 3 were currently under review for procedural violations. All 3, quietly suspended pending investigation, but without public disclosure. Marissa requested full financials from the fund's listed banking intermediary and got flagged by a Treasury liaison within the hour. You're not the first to raise questions about that name, the agent said over the secure line. Lexington Pioneer is under passive review. They're tied to several unusual trust movements, primarily routed through Colorado Springs. What's your angle? Weapons infiltration, Marissa answered, then added, and a dog who keeps finding ghosts from classified files. A pause. Then the agent said, the fund's founder, his name's not public, but internal record shows a controlling interest was once held by Colonel Everett Langford. You know him? Marissa went cold. She knew the name. Everyone in her circles did. Langford had once been a logistics overseer in the Defense Ordnance Redistribution Division. 10 years ago, he had been quietly discharged after a Senate subcommittee unearthed a scandal involving the illegal transfer of surplus arms to overseas contractors. It was swept under a broad rug called national security confidentiality, and Langford vanished from the public sphere. If this fund was connected to him, it wasn't an accident. It was a backdoor. A shell with purpose. She pulled up Vickers' current location. His badge had pinged at Supply Bay 3 earlier that morning. She requested an intercept. Within the hour, he was brought in, not in cuffs but compliant. Mid-40s, pale, the look of a man who'd grown used to systems turning the other way. Marissa entered the holding room alone. She didn't start with threats. She started with a photo, an old press clipping from Langford's trial, face circled, eyes hollow. She slid it across the table. This is who's really paying you. Vickers blinked slowly. I don't know that man, maybe not personally, but that fund in your account, it traces back to him. It was just extra money, Vickers mumbled. Said it was a hardship grant. I got hurt on shift last year, to Andy Foreman. Nothing illegal, he insisted. Just, sometimes we helped load crates off hours. Stuff that didn't have labels, nothing dangerous, just routing help. Did you open any of them? Not allowed, he said. Told us not to. Said it was above manifest government surplus. Off-books age packages. And now his voice cracked, real money. And I didn't think it was. I didn't know. Didn't know what? Marissa pressed. He leaned forward, palms shaking. I thought it was smuggling, maybe phones, meds. Something gray matty. Not bombs, not guns. I didn't know it was tied to terrorism. Marissa held his stare for a beat longer. She knew this kind of man, not evil, just weak. Someone who didn't look beyond the first locked door. But his fear wasn't an act. She believed him, and that made it worse because it meant the entire system had been played. Not with brute force, but with patient rock, silent funding, legal pathways misused, patriotism weaponized through a promise of helping the forgotten. Back in her office, she reviewed Langford's final years before discharge. He had spent his last assignments in charge of managing non-lethal aid shipments and obsolete gear disposal. According to one unsealed memo, his approach to asset optimization was praised internally, until items began showing up in black markets overseas. Langford's response had been simple, misplacement, not malice. But now Marissa saw the map forming. Bexington wasn't charity, it was camouflage. And the men and women like Vickers were pawns in a game they didn't understand. She sat with Troy that evening, one hand resting on his back as the news played on mute across the precinct TV. DHS had released a public bulletin asking for tips on usual cargo routing practices and anonymous bonus programs for airport staff. It was vague, it had to be, but the damage had begun to bleed through the surface. Troy shifted beside her, his ears twitching slightly at the soft hum of static. Marissa turned the volume up, catching only one word before the commercial rolled in: Nevada. She reached for the remote, rewound and played the segment again. A regional news anchor mentioned a federal sweep at a decommissioned airbase outside Las Vegas. No context, just a headline and a stock image of a hangar. She stood quickly, adrenaline flooding her veins as the threads converged. Langford. The weapon, the fund, the fingerprints, the voice that warned her. And now, a place, the airbase that had birthed it all. Marissa stared at the frozen image on the screen, the aerial shot of the decommissioned airbase in Nevada. Hangars hollow under desert light, each building casting long shadows like the remains of something once operational but never truly buried. Something inside her tightened, not just suspicion, but memory. The type of tightening that precedes a truth long suspected but never dared to be spoken aloud. She turned toward Troy, who lay by the file cabinet, head down but ears twitching. There had been something too visceral in the way he'd responded to the suitcase. Too familiar. And now the word Nevada again. It wasn't coincidence, it was context finally surfacing. She pulled out the one folder she had never opened since Troy had been reassigned to her, a sealed manila envelope labeled Transfer K9 Tactical MWD Series /T17. Inside were evaluation reports, incident debriefs, neurological assessments. Most handlers didn't read too far back into their dog's service history. But Marissa wasn't most handlers, and this case had already broken past every rule. She scanned the field notes from Afghanistan and Iraq, skimmed past standard IED detection logs, until she reached a red-stamped file, Operation Red Courage Listening for Kandahar Outskirts, /Oct7 2018. The report was blurred in parts, redacted with thick black lines, but what remained was enough. Troy, then designated as MWDT-17, had been embedded with a SAC-4 unit on a compound sweep near an abandoned NGO facility, suspected of housing bomb-making material. The team had entered based on drone heat signals at 5:21 hours. A concealed device detonated in the East Wing. 2 soldiers, L. Joel Marin and Sergeant David Krieg, were killed instantly. The K9 unit survived with minor physical injury. However, post-mission analysis noted extreme behavioral distress, including prolonged howling, failure to engage during debrief routines, and eventual withdrawal from scent recognition drills. The final assessment labeled him neurologically impacted, possible sensory trauma from explosive compound FX13 exposure. He had been retired from active duty within 6 months. Marissa sat back, stunned. Troy hadn't just smelled something familiar in that suitcase. He had remembered. His reaction wasn't to the physical structure of the weapons, but to the chemical profile. The precise blend of bomb-making residue was a trigger, tied not only to training but to grief. She looked down at him now, suddenly understanding the tension in his body that morning, the sharpness in his bark, the way he had scraped at the suitcase like digging towards something that haunted him. Troy hadn't been alerting to the present danger. He had been pulled into the past, into the memory of a scent tied to death. And that meant one terrifying thing. Whatever had been inside that suitcase wasn't random. It was exact. It was familiar. It was from the same lineage of explosives that had once taken the lives of his brothers. She called the forensic unit. Run a deeper chemical breakdown on the foil and inner lining. I need compound layering comparison with Kandahar IED profiles, especially anything containing FX13 variants. The tech on the other end hesitated. That's not in most libraries, ma'am. It's not in most libraries, Marissa said. Get clearance. Start with the JSOC field archive. I'll authorize the request. On it, came the reply. Hours later, the results came in. The suitcase's interior bore micro-residue of triacetone triperoxide base, bonded with ammonium nitrate but laced with trace FX13 stabilizer, the same formulation used in experimental detonation simulations in Afghanistan. The compound had never been mass deployed, only tested under elite scenarios. Someone had recreated it, or preserved it. Either way, it was back, and Troy had known before any machine could. Marissa felt a tremor run through her. She stood and looked again at Troy, who had now risen, sensing her tension, moving to her side with a quiet presence that spoke more than any alarm ever could. You remembered, didn't you? She whispered. You were the first to see it coming. Again. She returned to her whiteboard and added a new line. K9 memory trigger matched to Kandahar signature. This wasn't about airport security breaches anymore. It wasn't about smuggling. It was about method. Whoever was orchestrating this wasn't importing weapons for street use or resale. They were staging, reconstructing fragments of past trauma into new urban maps. That night, she reviewed drone footage from the Kandahar operation. She paused on a still of the ruins, of the compound wall blown inward. She recognized the same dust pattern in the suitcase's fabric lining under the lab's UV light. Someone had handled that case with hands that knew war. Someone who had been there. She dug deeper into Marcus Shaw's unsealed vasiatric evaluations. One entry stood out. Subject demonstrates hypervigilance around uniformed dogs. Reactivity spikes in proximity to K9s with combat tags. Another line beneath it read, repeated references to guilt, loss of control, use of tactical experience for unsanctioned calibration. Troy wasn't just reacting to scent. He was reacting to intent. to the emotional aftermath embedded in the molecules themselves. Suddenly, it all aligned. Shaw had been part of a blacklisted mission. The suitcase bore chemical traces only found in elite operations. Langford had overseen those deployments. The airport handlers had been groomed via financial cover, and the same type of bomb that killed Troy's former team was now circling through the nation's most critical transit hub, without an actual explosion. Because the terror wasn't the detonation, it was the simulation of it. The psychological destabilization of those tasked to defend. And as Marissa looked over at Troy, whose amber eyes were locked on her with the intensity of shared memory, she realized something deeper. That the enemy wasn't just testing the system's hardware, they were testing its soul. Marissa had barely processed the emotional weight of Troy's reaction when her phone vibrated with a priority-level alert from the Federal Cargo Rousing System. The message bore the red UGENT code used only for flag transfers with national security implications. She tapped the screen and her breath caught. Another suitcase, flagged just 2 hours ago at Denver International, had been intercepted based on chemical trace detection by a randomly deployed customs drone. Its contents had not yet been disclosed in full, but the accompanying image showed enough. A hard-shell black case lined in silver thermal foil, zip-tied at the corners in the same off-angle binding pattern as the suitcase from Atlanta. The routing number was encoded with a signature hash identical to the one hidden beneath the tape on the first suitcase. Whoever had packed this second case had used the same system, the same method, and quite possibly the same source. Marissa forwarded the alert to Homeland HQ and requested cross-verification. While she waited, she opened a secure call with Denver Field Command. Agent Rivera picked up, voice low but tight. "We have it in containment," he confirmed. "No detonation signatures, but traces of the same nitrate blend. Your guy was right. This isn't an isolated breach, it's a coordinated circuit." "You checked for serial marking?" Marissa asked. "Already done," Rivera said. "No serial, but the foil's inner seams have the same insulation scoring. Whoever's packaging these has a military background. Clean lines, repeat patterns, efficient concealment. This wasn't built to last, it was built to move." "And the point of origin?" she asked. "Memphis. Outbound freight misrouted as humanitarian aid. We're backtracking the manifest, but so far it looks like a reroute cover from a supposedly defunct logistics hub." "Lexington Fund?" she asked. A pause. Indirectly, the facility was leased through a shell corp linked to their parent grantor. Marissa felt her chest tighten. If this network was larger than they thought, and if the packages were being routed nationwide with military precision, they weren't looking at a plot, they were looking at a dry run. She turned back toward the operations board and shifted Troy's training logs aside to reveal the inter-airport security map. The sequence was no longer local. She placed pins at Atlanta and Denver, then connected both with supply data from Memphis. The triangle was forming, one that bypassed central tracking, built on legacy infrastructure, and moved inside the trusted network of domestic air cargo. Then came the second blow. Maurice received an encrypted update from her internal affairs liaison, flagged with yellow caution, not red, which meant it wasn't confirmed danger but was serious enough to demand immediate review. The email contained a call log. Date 13 days prior. Duration: Autobus Victor Helms, assigned to internal TSA investigation task force based in Atlanta. Marissa's jaw clenched. Helms had been in and out of her office for the past week, asking the right questions, pressing for specifics on cargo control rotation. His clearances had been fast-tracked due to his background in cyber fraud analytics. No one had thought twice. She opened Helms's personnel file and began cross-reinforcing timestamps with badge activity. One detail leapt out immediately. On the morning of the first suitcase incident, Helms had been inside the security control server room for 23 minutes, under the premise of reviewing a system error. No one had authorized the visit. The logs showed he had used an override passcode to access archive storage, one that would allow him to loop security footage or insert pre-recorded segments. It was the same tactic used to mask the 13-minute blackout from the check-in area. Marissa didn't hesitate. She radioed Central Command. "Lock down Victor Helms, no exits, no communications. I want his devices seized now." The operator confirmed the order and dispatched officers. Within 10 minutes, Helms was in holding. They found 2 phones on him, one registered, the other wiped clean except for a single unsent message. in the drafts folder. Next, all your phones on hand, unbarred doorway. The phone had no contacts, but its factory restore logs showed contact pairing with a device linked to a Memphis tower. Same tower used in communications flagged during the Nevada weapons loss 5 years ago. In interrogation, Helms remained calm, even casual. "You think I'm the guy?" he asked with a half-smile. "I'm just data cleanup. I see what they don't want to see." "You knew about the suitcase," Marissa said coldly. "You accessed the logs before the breach. You looped the cameras. Who are you working with?" "Working with?" he echoed, amused. "I think you mean, what am I working against?" She stared at him. "Go on." He leaned forward. "This system, it's full of cracks. That dog of yours finds one bomb and now you think you're stopping a war? You don't see it. These people you're chasing, they're not trying to kill civilians. They're trying to expose the lie. You're looking at traitors. I'm looking at patriots with better memory." "Memory of what?" Marissa pressed. "Of what was lost," he whispered. "Of the ones we left behind." The silence that followed was heavy. Marissa stood, throat dry, rage mixing with realization. Helms wasn't just compromised, he was radicalized. Somewhere along the line, someone had weaponized his cynicism. Someone had convinced him that the breaches weren't crimes but corrections. She walked out without another word. Outside, she took a breath, fingers tightening on Troy's leash. He looked up at her, waiting. She gave the silent signal, and they began to move. Not toward resolution, but toward containment. Because now, with at least 2 suitcases already in play, and a mole confirmed inside, every second counted. She radioed the National Task Force. "Put all major cargo hubs on full alert. Notify TSA DHD. We have a coordinated threat moving under a false flag. This is not about smuggling. This is about symbolic infrastructure exposure. Someone is setting us up to fail in sequence." Then her phone pinged again. A third alert. JFK, New York, another flagged suitcase, same insulation, same code tag. The third suitcase alert at JFK confirmed what Marissa had feared since Denver. A network, synchronized, methodical, not improvised but rehearsed. Each case revealed a new breadcrumb, and yet none exploded. That was the part that gnawed at her most. Why stage an attack if you're not going to follow through? Unless the explosion wasn't the message, it was the presence, a silent signal, meant not to kill but to be discovered, decoded, to send a narrative instead of a shockwave. While authorities in New York scrambled to lock down Terminal 4, Marissa stayed behind in Atlanta to dig, turning away from the threat for just a moment to finally understand the why. Because whatever this was, it wasn't blind terrorism. It was grief, weaponized. She sat at her desk with a thick printout of archival records, now declassified from Langford's years overseeing ordnance redistribution. Her fingers traced down each page until she reached a name that stopped her cold. Thomas Evard. The name had been scrawled once in pencil on the edge of a logistics manifest tied to a delayed field recovery project from Iraq. She searched the DoD personnel files. The name came up again. Marine Corps EOD Unit. KIA status confirmed by partial remains. But the deeper she looked, the shakier that confirmation became. No full body recovered. The mission log simply said, "Ambush near Tikrit, presumed dead after team dispersal. No extraction recorded." His emergency contact, Jacob Evard, older brother, USMC, K9 Division, last listed as lead handler for MWDT 17. She stared at the name, at the coincidence that suddenly wasn't. Jacob had been Troy's last military handler before the incident in Kandahar. After that, no further updates, only a note in Troy's record. Handler reassigned. No contact permitted post-retirement. It had never occurred to Marissa that the trauma Troy carried wasn't just from an explosion, but from the loss of someone who shared his every step. If Thomas Evard was Jacob's brother, and Jacob had vanished from record, what if he hadn't died? What if he was part of this? She contacted a friend at the VA Verification Center and requested a sweep of all known aliases tied to deceased veterans who never had a confirmed burial. The results took 2 hours but returned one anomaly. A man named Elias Cross, registered in a closed medical program for PTSD treatment, funded privately, and listed with no next of kin. His fingerprints were partial matches to those of Jacob Evard, but never flagged due to misfiled dental records. Cross had checked into a facility near Cheyenne Mountain 4 years ago. The address was tied to a private security company, once funded, indirectly, by the Lexington Pioneer Fund. She cross-referenced this with communication logs from Helm's burner phone. 2 of the messages had pinged near that facility. Coordinates didn't lie. And it wasn't just Jacob. The deeper she dug into the known operatives involved in suitcase routing, the more names emerged that didn't fit the narrative of foreign terrorism, but of familiar, honorably discharged soldiers with spotless records that ended in silence, listed as MIA, presumed dead, or removed for psychiatric. They had all once served in places no longer acknowledged, under operations folded into budget lines labeled contract contingency. That night, Rivera from Denver called again, voice quieter. We ran a voice ID match on a transmission intercepted on a low HA's band last week. It was a distorted broadcast warning to avoid overreaction to what was coming. You're going to want to sit down. Why? Because the voice belongs to someone DHS listed as dead in 2019. Marine Captain Jacob Evard. Maurice, are you certain? 93% match with known samples. Tone, inflection, pauses. We think he's alive. And he's leading this. Marissa leaned back, staring at Troy, now lying peacefully on the floor, but with the quiet intensity of a soldier in standby. He had known this scent, this rhythm from the beginning. Not just from chemicals, from memory, from the absence of someone who never came home. The next morning, Marissa received an encrypted envelope from the Office of Veteran Accountability. A file leaked anonymously. Inside was a transcript from a sealed committee hearing buried 3 years ago, detailing Langford's final testimony. In it, he admitted that several special operations units had been redirected without follow-up or debrief, left in the field to operate autonomously under promises of future extraction that never came. You lost contact, he had said. But more than that, we stopped trying. The pages were smudged, ink fading from years under bureaucratic weight. But one sentence was circled in red by the Lakers' hand. Some ghosts walk back in through the front door, because we never gave them keys to come home. Marissa turned the line over and over in her head. These weren't foreign attackers. They were men who had been used, discarded, abandoned. They weren't striking to cause panic, they were forcing acknowledgement. Every suitcase was a story. Every silver-lined package a shout from the shadows. And each new airport wasn't a target, it was a stage. Their mission wasn't destruction, it was visibility. She ordered a review of all case handlers at the K-9 Tactical Division over the past decade. One of the names stood out. Little Jacob Evard. Listed as exemplary, then dropped from rotation post-Kandahar. He had requested to keep Troy. Request denied. Shortly after, he disappeared. All personnel contacts ceased. No follow-ups logged. Now he was speaking again, and he had the attention of every federal agency from coast to coast. The order came through at 6:13 a.m., local LAX time. High pen-dried alert. Potential IED routing confirmed through gate D9 via an untagged utility crate. Marissa was already in the command truck parked just outside Terminal 2. Troy seated beside her, eyes locked on the slow march of cargo toward morning deployment. Intelligence had triangulated the drop point from Denver's broadcast interception and an intercepted message from the suspect network. The timing lined up with inbound redeployment schedules. 5:58 a.m. movement from a Nevada logistics plane, nondescript, declared as technical repair gear. It had bypassed primary scrutiny due to its clean transponder path, but chemical sensors had caught a low humorous signature in the foil lining, and now the window was closing. Marissa tightened Troy's vest, watching his muscles tense with each distant rumble from the runway. He wasn't barking. Not yet. But his stillness meant more than noise. It meant anticipation. The team moved in 2 columns through the lower corridor of LAX's old baggage maintenance system, an obsolete maze now repurposed as emergency storage. A mechanic had reported flickering lights and faint scuff marks near a side vent. Not unusual, but Marissa had seen the pattern before. Smudges like that weren't the product of machines. They were signs of waiting. Marissa followed, stepping carefully. The air in the corridor felt wrong, cool but stale. And then, a pause. Troy froze by an access grate, nose pressed close, tail straight. Then came the bark. One sharp, broken cry, followed by a whimper unlike anything she had heard from him before. She signaled for the team to hold. Carefully, she approached Troy's side and looked down into the grate, where a narrow emergency tunnel sloped downward beneath the terminal. A shadow moved, slow, human. The figure emerged hands first, followed by a slow shuffle of boots covered in dust and grease. The man was tall, gaunt, wearing an unmarked cap, tactical gloves, and an old desert-toned field jacket. His face was lined but alert, eyes sharp, not desperate. Marissa raised her weapon. "Don't move." The man lifted his hands. "I won't," he said. Then he looked down, and his voice broke. "Troy?" Troy didn't growl. He didn't lunge. Instead, he tilted his head, as if searching beyond the physical. He stepped closer, cautiously, and sniffed the man's boots, then his gloves, then his chest. Then, without command, he sat. His tail didn't wag, but he looked up, ears forward, nose flared. The man swallowed hard, eyes wet now. After all these years, Marissa lowered her weapon, just slightly. "Jacob Evard," he nodded. "I'm not here to run. I already said what I needed to say." "You placed the case?" "No," he said. "I only moved it. The real payload is outside, in the truck, wired to detonate remotely. It's a decoy like the others, meant to be found, meant to scare, but not to kill. I never stopped the others, but this time, I needed someone to listen. I needed him to." She didn't move. "And the others, Shaw, Langford?" Jacob looked away. "Gone dark. They wanted escalation. They think the only way to be remembered is to break something people can't ignore. But I didn't come for that. I came for closure. For my brother. For him." He nodded toward Troy. "We survived a war together. Then I came home and realized I was less visible than a ghost. He got reassigned. I was left to rot. We were both—" Marissa stepped forward. "So you did this? To get noticed?" "No," Jacob said. "To force someone to remember. We buried what we didn't want to explain. But he remembered. That smell, the Kandahar soil, the copper, the powder mix. He remembered." Behind them, her team secured the corridor. Bomb squad units moved toward the outer parking zone where Jacob had indicated the truck. Troy remained at Jacob's feet, still and silent. And then Marissa heard the click of the radio. "Device located, confirmed, live but stable, no timer, no detonation command received." "Disarm," she ordered. "Now." Jacob slowly knelt, one hand resting on his knee, the other still raised. "You can arrest me. You should. But don't call me a terrorist." Marissa didn't answer. Instead, she crouched beside Troy and laid a hand on his head. "You didn't come here to disappear," she said softly. "You came here to be seen." "I came because he remembered," Jacob whispered again, voice raw. "And that's more than anyone ever gave me." They walked Jacob out in cuffs, but not with violence. Troy paced beside him, step for step, not wagging but not resisting either. Outside, the sunrise broke faintly across the tarmac. The truck was disarmed within minutes. The threat neutralized. No lives lost, no explosion. But the system had been changed. Back at headquarters, Marissa filed her final report, noting that the suspects in question acted with precision, but not intent to harm. Rather, intent to awaken attention toward a forgotten veteran population. DHS would spin the story, soften the narrative, but those who read between the lines would understand. Troy lay at her feet once more, calm now, as if the circuit had closed. She leaned down and whispered, "You found him. Not the suspect, the soldier, the part of yourself you'd left in the sand." And for the first time since Kandahar, Troy let out a long, low sigh, not of tension but of relief. If this story moved you, consider liking and subscribing so you won't miss what comes next. What part of the story hit you the hardest? And by the way, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. Let's talk.